DeSantis and the anti-tech censorship bill in Florida are the first shot in winning the war against big tech censorship. I'm Andrew Esquire, and this is The Legal Mindset, where we train you to be your own judge. So big news out of Florida, and we've been dealing with a lot of Florida, not just because I'm from Florida, but frankly because DeSantis is pushing to be a front runner in 2024 and is trying to be first out the gate with a lot of strong Republican legislation. Now, over the last election season, we've seen that big tech has had it in for Republicans. They've been deplatforming not just conservatives of the establishment brand, but all Republicans, all conservative, all right-leaning people, even moderates. Anybody who disagrees with the liberal orthodoxy is taken off of social media. Twitter is the prime example. The President of the United States, yes, the President of the United States, let that sink in. The leader of the United States was taken off of a media platform. And inherently that seems wrong. They should be given the ability to access these platforms. But once again, we're not just seeing it at that highest of levels, but at all levels. If you say something that a big tech platform doesn't want, they are taking people down. That's why Florida took that action, took that first step, and we're the first state to officially punish big tech for censoring people. So what did Florida do? What have they come out with? Well, they've came out with a bill that specifically requires big tech companies, social media companies, to give people notice. Hey, when they deplatform you, they should tell you why. They shouldn't just be able to deplatform you with zero justification whatsoever. They should say, hey, this is why we're declining you. This is why we're turning it down. And that seems to be pretty reasonable. I mean, if you were accessing something, you put your life's work into it, maybe you spent a lot of time building up a massive Twitter following. And then all of a sudden that can be nuked from orbit because Jack Dorsey doesn't like your politics, because he doesn't like what you're talking about. That just seems manifestly unreasonable. The other thing is, if they do ban you, the bill says they can only do it for a certain period of time without notice. So for example, they could take you down for 14 days maximum. And after that, they'd have to give you some notice or reason if they're taking you off their platform. They'd have to give you some sort of procedure, some sort of due process. In the US, we like due process. We like our procedures to have a process to say, hey, here's the reason why you're doing something. Once again, this is gonna be tricky. And while I'm all on the side of fighting big tech censorship, and pro-free speech, under the First Amendment, as we have it construed and interpreted right now, corporations are also allowed to have speech. They're also allowed to have their own viewpoints and to only allow people with certain viewpoints. They are allowed to discriminate based on viewpoint currently, because big tech, social media, is not treated like a common carrier. It's not treated like a public service. Well, let's say your local bakery can say, hey, look, I don't want to do this project for the Republican Party because I don't like Republicans. Well, an airline can't do that. An airline, for example, which is a common carrier, which is a public means of transit, it can't say, I'm not carrying you on this airplane because you're a Republican or a Libertarian or a Democrat. An airline can't filter you out for your political beliefs because they're treated as a common carrier. And that's what the standard should be for big tech. Big tech has grown to the same level as the airlines. In fact, hell, big tech is bigger than the airlines and more important to the economy, more important to society, more important to culture than even a bus line, Amtrak, or American Airlines. These questions regarding social media are going to be growing in the future. When you ask yourself, social media, Twitter, YouTube, are they going to be there in 10, 20 years? Well, likely they might be there in some form, shape, or way, but there'll be new methods of social media. There'll be other social media out there. And at what point do we want to set some boundaries, set some guidelines? How much should they have to conform to American values? Or do we just allow them to do whatever, break whatever rules or principles we had established in the Constitution? Because once again, when they're operating in a way that is discriminatory against certain viewpoints, that goes against the core of our Constitution. That's a fundamental American value, is viewpoint freedom. We want to encourage freedom of speech. And if you're silencing online speech, that is a massive form of speech. In fact, for most people, when's the last time you had a huge public debate in a public place? You went out there and you went to a public place and you had a debate with someone face to face. Probably never. I mean, most people have never done formal debate unless you're, well, a lawyer or you've done debate class. You probably haven't had a lot of face-to-face arguments. To have laws that only protect those face-to-face arguments, that don't look at tech, that don't look at the way people communicate today, well, that's just antiquated. And you know, back in the day, it was conservatives that were always going back to the originalist interpretation, that were looking at, hey, what happened during the time of the horse and buggy of the revolution, you know? What happened way back in the day? But instead they should look to the future and how to take those principles from the founding of the country, take those principles that made America great, that made America an amazing country that everyone wants to come to. These principles, these core freedoms are why people love coming here, because we can talk about what we want to talk about without fear of being thrown in jail, fined, or what have you. And the fear that we all live with, anybody who's out there saying something like I'm saying, or anybody else who's in the same sphere is saying, we could be deplatformed for just having a view that is interpreted as against the mainstream liberal narrative. Anything that goes against that grain, you could be censored for, and that's not what America is about. America is about being able to state your opinion, being able to argue, being able to articulate, and also respecting other opinions. Big tech should not have the ability to do what the CCP does. They should not be able to censor people into oblivion. But more and more, well, they're seeming like communist China. They're seeming like they want to regulate everything that's said online. And the more monopolies that are founded, the more Facebook takes over half of the internet. Well, if Google and Facebook are the only two companies, well, we all might as well believe in their corporate creed. And that's un-American. That's fundamentally un-American. And some justices, like I talked about in my past video, Justice Thomas, have said, hey, we are open to regulating big tech as a common carrier. And why I say Ron DeSantis is genius on this is he knows big tech is going to challenge it. Google, Facebook, Twitter, they will challenge this, they will bring this to court. But if it's brought to the Supreme Court, well, under the current composition, they will lose, they will be censored. But is Uncle Joe sleeping on this? No. As I've said, you need to pay attention to Uncle Joe's plot to pack the court.